The Atlantic Coast of Nicaragua, a beautiful place rich in resources and culture. Lush forests, wide rivers, plentiful fish and wildlife all factor into the balance indigenous peoples keep with their environment here. These rich resources are also coveted by some not so willing to live in harmony with their landscape. Since 2012, settlers from other parts of Nicaragua have been illegally clear-cutting thousands of hectares of forest and terrorizing local communities.
Ispelnani uplanan inan taun uplika bela arma ilal brispelnani demawla wanikaya demawla bara winam rakay suwintem kayritem pip ti ispel ba ko arma brikan armi ka brewla ba klapia wala kahabe makupla ikay bara yang tray wiri uplanani ra winam rakay anani tawan uplika nani so ba yang ne sin wini rakay ka bara pali kahuritem ay sabanega.
People come from departments like Matagalpa, Esteli, Nueva Guinea, and others to log rare woods, mine for gold and precious metals, ranch cattle, and often plant marijuana. Their disregard for traditional living disturbs the natural equilibrium, resulting in water supplies contaminated with heavy metals and arsenic, decimated wildlife habitats, and increased flooding of indigenous villages downstream.
Nahatas bay kanara na Indian na nina iwan na winaba ispel na ni babuwi baraw ni awula baraw sofkan kana ni daw kisa baraw sofkan kana ni daw kisa tingni na ni ra ispel na ni dingkantem kyadi na ubi mo ni kitos na ni kata klaki mo ni ki bandera tanis daw kisa ban bibting kisa tasban na ni sauk kisa bareng na ni luhpil pabris na ani winapana ni tukia bapia isa kidan unta na ni kata ulsaw kisa tadbay kisa kisa anba mana.
The situation is desperate and only continues to grow worse as community leaders are shot and communal meetings are attacked by groups of men with AK-47s and M16s. The community fights back the best they can, often only with rocks and sticks.
Na sutrawil ka ba sim tas batrawil ka muhiki ikan kininawa Gerardo Conrao chong witin tas badukiara karnaisikan ispel na ni para tasba at kinaniba para an ispel na ni baldimi tasba ra al kinaniba para utin ay klavikan ispel na ni rasin taybi munisaki ka na itas bayawina wait na kumulukan ka karna kan uplasiya abras kan.
Ahorita tenemos un anciano que trabaja al otro lado del río Wawa. Le agarraron, le golpearon, casi está por morir. Casualmente la semana pasada, a una finca que tenía un señor, milagro que no esté el señor, llegó a matar. Quemó la casa, cortaron los árboles frutales. Tuvo esperanzado 2 días que llegara el señor para agarrarlo y matarlo.
It has become a cultural genocide. From outright rape and murder of indigenous peoples to the obliteration of their culture through proxy. Wild animals and foods, once plentiful, are now nearly non-existent. Lost are the deep spiritual connections indigenous people held with fellow forest-dwelling species, their natural relationships cut by the settlers' chainsaws. Their ancestral languages are being forgotten, with the influx of Spanish speakers and the push towards traditional education. Their water, precious lifeblood to these river communities, is being polluted with sediment and chemicals. Families can no longer gather food or plant in the forest for fear of their lives.
Son amenazas, casas quemadas. ¿Qué es lo que pasa? Ahorita las mujeres tienen miedo irse al monte, porque ni cerca del caño puede irse una sola persona, porque temor que se secuestre, para que no hace daño. Ahorita es tiempo de la siembra. Y uno no puede andar solo con la pareja porque según ellos se van a devengar.
The remote nature of indigenous villages leaves them particularly vulnerable to attack, especially those with forest reserves on the frontier with Nicaragua's nationally governed areas. RAN and RAS, the autonomous regions of the North and South Atlantic Coast, recognize communal law as the highest in the land.
Somos regionales, somos de la misma etnia, compartimos, vivimos armónicamente, tal como venimos con los hechos pasados. Pero después de asumir 3, 4 años, el papel, la cultura, la tradición como que nos viene manipulando, como que nos viene cambiando. Quiere ocupar sistema de mestizo y nosotros como Miskito no vamos a permitir a que el Estado nos manipule. Queremos trabajar y vivir culturalmente, no políticamente.
This is supported by the National Law 445, the Communal Property Regimen, which establishes that land in the autonomous regions can never be sold under any circumstances and only used in accordance with the communal approval. Indigenous peoples have been trying to govern their lands, expel these settlers, and make compromises with agreeable parties, but unwilling settlers simply kill the community emissaries, despite having invaded the territory or acquired land with illegitimate documents from unscrupulous lawyers. These conflicts have not been resolved by the Nicaraguan state for lack of political will to complete saneamiento, the final step enumerated in Law 445, assuring government support for the removal of all illegal residents of the autonomous region. It would allow the indigenous title holders to rightfully manage their land, which they can't do currently because of the multitudes of heavily armed settlers occupying and destroying their communal reserves. Without international pressure to protect the human rights of indigenous peoples and the irreplaceable environmental habitat, the destruction and death tolls will only continue to rise.